Stalin, Pablo Miranda, 2012 by Marxist-Leninist Communist Party of Ecuador, PCML. Hosted on Red Star Publisher. Excerpts from a talk held in the Dominican Republic on the 50th anniversary of the death of Comrade Stalin, at the invitation of the Communist Party of Labor. During his lifetime, Comrade Stalin won the admiration and affection of the working class and all the peoples of the vast Soviet Union, as well as the respect and friendship of the workers of the 5 continents, the fervor and enthusiasm of the communists of all countries. Of course, he elicited the hatred of the reactionaries, imperialists and bourgeois who felt deeply hurt by the colossal achievements of the Soviet Union, by the great economic, cultural, technological and scientific feats of the workers and socialist intelligentsia, by the great and resounding triumphs of the revolution and socialism, of the communists. In this plot against Stalin by which they fought communism, the Nazi propaganda stood out for its slander and persistence, which did not let one day pass without launching its dire diatribes. Of course, this counter-revolutionary and anti-communist hatred also characterized Trotsky and his followers. Shortly after Stalin's death, the voices of the communists who had assumed the leadership of the Soviet Party and the state were added to the chorus of the reactionaries and anti-communists of all countries who had always reviled Stalin. From then until our day, anti-Stalinism has been the recurring voice of all the reactionaries, of the ideologues of the bourgeoisie, of the Trotskyists, revisionists and opportunists of all shades. By attacking Stalin, they are trying to tear down the extraordinary achievements of socialism in the Soviet Union and in what had been the socialist camp. They want to minimize and even ignore the great contributions of the Red Army and the Soviet peoples and the decisive struggle against Nazism, to denigrate the Communist Party and the socialist system as totalitarian, as the negation of freedom and democracy. By attacking Stalin they are aiming at Lenin, Marx and socialism. To denigrate Stalin as bloodthirsty and a bureaucrat means to attack the dictatorship of the proletariat and thereby deny the freedom of the workers and peoples, socialist democracy. To slander Stalin as being ignorant and mediocre is to refuse to recognize his great contributions to revolutionary theory, to Marxism-Leninism. To attack Stalin means to deny the necessity of the existence and struggle of the Communist Party, to transform it into a movement of free thinkers and anarcho-syndicalists, to remove its Leninist essence, democratic centralism. The height of anti-Stalinism is to call Stalinists those who betrayed the revolution and socialism in the name of doing away with the crimes of Stalin and of making the Soviet Union a democratic country. The folly of the reactionaries and opportunists does not allow them to recognize that the confessed anti-Stalinists, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Gorbachev, and Yeltsin, destroyed brick by brick the great work of the Soviet working class and peoples, of the communists, of Lenin and Stalin. The attacks on Stalin are of such magnitude that even a significant number of social fighters, leftists and revolutionaries have fallen victim to these slanders. Basically, they are sincere people, interested in social and national liberation, who do not know the personality and work of Stalin and therefore join the chorus of these distortions. There are also some petty bourgeois revolutionaries who attack Stalin from supposedly humanist positions. It is up to us communists to defend the revolutionary truth about Stalin, and it is our responsibility because we are his comrades, the ones who are continuing his work. The Great October Socialist Revolution was one of the great events of humanity. The workers and peoples of the world's largest country stood up, undertook a long revolutionary process, led by the Bolshevik Party, which led them to victory in October of 1917. This great feat of the workers and peasants, the soldiers and the intelligentsia was a complex process, full of twists and turns and advances and retreats. The proletarian revolution that smashed the Tsarist Empire to pieces was inconceivable without the guidance of Marxism, which established itself as the emancipatory doctrine of the working class, without the efforts of Russian communists, mainly of Lenin by his creative application in the social, economic, cultural, historical and political conditions of old Russia, without the building, existence and struggle of the Bolshevik Party, without the decisive participation of the working class and the millions of poor peasants, without the social and political mobilization of the broad masses, without the existence and fighting of the Red Army, and without the important contribution of the international working class. Several decades of strikes and street battles, the utilization of parliamentary struggle and the participation of the communists in the Duma, the ideological and political struggle against the bourgeoisie and the Tsarist autocracy, the organization of the Soviets of workers, peasants and soldiers, the great theoretical and political debate against opportunism within the party that led to the isolation of the Menshevik theses and proposals and to the formation of the Bolshevik party governed by democratic centralism, the fierce battles against social chauvinism and social pacifism on an international scale, the profuse and fruitful propaganda activity of the communists, the fight to win ideological and political hegemony within the Soviets, the Revolution of 1905 and its lessons, the February Revolution of 1917, its results and consequences, the Great Armed Insurrection of October, the Brest-Litovsk peace agreements, the Revolutionary Civil War, the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat. These constitute the most salient features and characteristics of the struggle for power of the Russian Communists, organized in the Bolshevik Party. Stalin was born in Gori, a small town close to Tbilisi, in Georgia, on December 21, 1879. His father was a shoemaker, the son of serfs, and his mother, a servant, was also the daughter of serfs. He joined into the ranks of the party in 1898, when he was 19 years old, and since that time his life, thoughts, dreams and his intellectual and physical effort were devoted to the cause of communism, to the fight for the revolution and socialism. Until March of 1917 when he moved to Petrograd and joined the editorship of Pravda, Stalin had been and was a tireless organizer of trade unions and the party, of demonstrations and strikes, of newspapers and magazines, a student of Marxism and the author of various documents and proposals. He had been in prison and exile, at party congresses and conferences. He was a fighter and leader of the revolution. The revolutionary period that began with the February Revolution was the scene of great ideological and political confrontations against the bourgeoisie and the imperialists, but also against the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries, and also within the party. The whole process of winning the majority of the Soviets for the policy of the Bolsheviks had in Stalin a great leader and architect. The preparation of the insurrection, the technical and military contacts and preparations and also the debate within the leadership of the Bolshevik party found in Stalin a protagonist of the highest order. He was a great comrade of Lenin in all aspects of political work. Stalin was part of the first Soviet government as a People's Commissar of Nationalities. He participated actively in the Revolutionary Civil War as a commissar and commander on various fronts and showed his military and political ability in forging and consolidating the young Soviet power and strengthening the Red Army. He was one of the most outstanding leaders of the party, the government and the army. In 1921, by decision of the party and together with Lenin he participated actively in the foundation of the Third or Communist International, which would play a great role in the organization and leadership of the revolution on the international level. A great task that the proletarian revolution took up was the formation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, which meant concretely the application of the line of the party with regard to the nationalities and peoples. The prison house of nations that was the Tsarist Empire became a community of nations, nationalities and peoples, governed by socialism, which put forward the defense and development of the national cultures and their inclusion in the building of the new society. Having taken up these responsibilities, his dedication and selflessness in their fulfillment and his theoretical ability made Stalin the general secretary of the party in 1922. When Lenin died in 1924, the political bureau of the party designated Stalin as the main leader of the party. The Communist Party, Bolshevik, under the leadership of Stalin, faithful to the Leninist legacy, pushed through the new economic policy, NEP, during the 1920s. Amidst great difficulties, relying on the mobilization of the working class and peasantry, defeating the blockade, sabotage and resistance of the defeated reactionary classes and the force of individual capitalism that emerged in the peasant economy, it succeeded in overcoming the disastrous material, economic and social situation that Russia had been in after the Civil War, with production reduced to 14% of the pre-war period. and which was seen in widespread famine and the profusion of diseases. In this period a bitter ideological and political battle was being waged within the party between the Bolsheviks and the so-called left communists, who wanted to export the revolution and place the weight of the economy on the peasantry, liquidating it as an ally of the proletariat. In 1929, the NEP was concluded and the accelerated collectivization of the countryside was begun. The great battle against the kulaks who wanted to reverse the revolutionary process in the countryside. In 1930, the process of large-scale industrialization was pushed forward with great material efforts and supported by the mobilization of the working class. It was a great feat that required large investments and therefore limited the possibilities for the well-being of the great masses of workers and peasants. Despite this, the revolutionary fervor and enthusiasm allowed for the fulfillment and even over-fulfillment of its goals. In the West, this was the time of the Great Depression. In the country of the Soviets it was the time of the victorious construction of socialism. The Soviet Union became the second greatest economic and commercial power in the world, after the United States. For 11 years, between 1930 and 1940, the USSR had an average growth of industrial production of 16.5%. A good part of socialist accumulation had to be invested in the defense and security of the Soviet Union, which had to deal with the arms race to which all the capitalist countries of Europe, the USA and Japan were committed. For 1938-39, the danger of imperialist war hung over Europe and the world. The German Nazis, the Italian fascists and the Japanese reactionaries were moving quickly to form the Axis. The Western powers headed by the Anglo-French alliance worked feverishly to conclude a pact with Germany in order to encourage it to direct its attacks against the Soviet Union. In order to liquidate the communists, wear down the Germans and enter the war under better conditions. It was a devious and cunning diplomatic game that handed over the Sudetenland and the rest of Czechoslovakia to the Germans. The Soviet Union was a developing economic and military power, but its military capability was much weaker than that of Germany, France, England or the USA. It was surrounded by powerful enemies and needed material resources and time to prepare itself for the eventual war which was announced with cannons and aircraft. The Soviet Union needed to combine international diplomacy and politics with its industrial development and military power. This circumstance forced the communists to devote a large quantity of material resources in this direction, but also to seek diplomatic alternatives that enabled its defense. Several international meetings, endless proposals and projects were addressed to the chancelleries. The Soviet Union could not establish an alliance against Nazism since the main interest of the Western powers made the Soviet Union their target. In these circumstances and for its defense, in August 1939, the Molotov-Von Ribbentrop Pact of Non-Aggression between Germany and the Soviet Union was signed. This international treaty gave the Soviet Union precious time to push forward its military industry. Utilizing large material resources and the will of the peoples, in a short time it was able to build planes, tanks, cannons, weapons and ammunition in large quantities, and simultaneously it could relocate its key industries located in European Russia to the east, behind the Urals. World War II broke out in 1939. The Germans invaded Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, the Balkans, France, Belgium and Netherlands, and utilizing blitzkrieg tactics, the Lightning War, in few weeks they destroyed the armies of those countries and imposed puppet governments. When it came to the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, the Germans did not have the military capacity to carry out and win with the blitzkrieg. They ran into the resistance of the Red Army, the guerrillas and the great masses of workers and peasants who defended the socialist fatherland. The Red Army put up a fierce resistance and gave way to the Nazi troops, forcing them to penetrate into a vast territory, teeming with guerrillas who persistently harassed them. They could not take Leningrad, much less Moscow. In Stalingrad a major battle was waged, street by street, house by house, man by man. The Reds resisted and then took the initiative and defeated the German army. That was the beginning of the end of the fascist beast. The Red Army launched the reconquest of its territories occupied by the Nazis and advanced victoriously across the mountains and plains of Europe, contributing to the liberation of several of the countries of Eastern Europe, up to Berlin. which was taken on May 9, 1945. This great victory of the Soviet Union was the fruit of the fortress of socialism, of the unity and will to action of the working class and peoples, of the valor of the Red Army, but it was also a consequence of the diplomatic, political and military genius of the General Staff and the leadership of the Soviet Party and government, led by Stalin. At the end of the war, the victory of the revolution took place in several countries of Europe, which established people's democratic governments, and the victory of the revolution in other Asian countries. The Soviet Union emerged as a great economic and military power that won the affection and respect of workers and peoples of the world, of the patriots and democrats, of the revolutionaries and especially the communists. The Soviet Union, Stalin and the Communist Party were the great protagonists in the defeat of fascism. The Great Patriotic War meant great human and material sacrifices for the proletarian state. The victory achieved was built upon the great spiritual heritage of socialism that protected the workers and peoples of the USSR. It was made possible by the great patriotic sentiments with which the Communist Party was able to inspire the bodies and minds of the Soviet peoples, by the deep affection of the workers for Soviet power, by the brave and courageous contribution of the Communists who put all their abilities and energy into the defense of socialism. The contribution of the Soviet Union in the Second World War was more than 20 million human beings, of which slightly more than 3 million were brave members of the Bolshevik Party. The party gave over its best men to the war, it lost invaluable political and military cadres, but it also further tempered the Bolshevik steel, and at the end of the war it had gained more than 5 million new members. At Yalta and Tehran, at the peace negotiations, the workers and peoples of the world had a great representative, Comrade Stalin, who knew, with wisdom, prudence and composure, how to restore the rights of the peoples and countries that had been victims of the war and fascism, how to contribute to the establishment of agreements and open the way to new levels of democracy and freedom in the world. World War II was the prelude to the national liberation of dozens of countries on the 5 continents, who won their independence by breaking with the old colonial order. The Soviet Union led by Stalin was always the safe and reliable rear of this great liberation movement. In the field of the revolution, the victories achieved in Albania and other countries of Eastern Europe, in China, Korea, and Vietnam, gave rise to the formation of the powerful socialist camp. A quarter of the population living on a third of the Earth's surface were building socialism and had in the Soviet Union, led by Stalin, an enlightening example and unreserved support. In the rest of the world, the working class, the peasantry, the youth and the progressive intelligentsia saw the socialist future of humanity with certainty and confidence. On the other hand, the end of the Second World War established a new order within the capitalist sphere. The United States became the main world power and had hegemony over the capitalist countries. There arose a new contradiction in the international sphere, one that opposed the old world of capital to the new world of socialism. The bourgeois ideologues and politicians called this the Cold War, alluding to the antagonism of the dispute. Once more the superiority of socialism became evident. In the Soviet Union, but also in the other countries of the socialist camp, the culture and well-being of the masses, science and technology, the social and material progress of the workers and peoples flourished. In 1949 the USSR was able to build the atomic bomb and in 1957 it launched the space race, taking the lead. Neocolonialism, a form of imperialist domination that emerged after the independence of the dependent nations and countries, always had a counterweight in the Soviet Union led by Stalin. The peoples of the former colonies always had a loyal friend. Within a few years, from 1917 to the early years of the 1950s, the proletarians, led by the communists organized in the Bolshevik Party of Lenin and Stalin, built the dreams of a new world, the world of socialism. They built the essentials. Many things were lacking, some failed, but humanity never knew a broader and truer democracy. Never before were men in their multitudes able to have material and social well-being, equality among their peers. This was proletarian democracy. It was an epic of the workers and peoples, the realization in life of the scientific theory of Marxism-Leninism, the gigantic effort of the communists, the serene and bold work of the leaders, Lenin and Stalin. When we speak of Stalin we are referring to the leader, the organizer, the head, the comrade and friend, who was really one of the great builders of the new man, of the new humanity. This understanding of Stalin cannot be conceived without discovering and learning about his extraordinary theoretical work. From the beginning of his communist activity he correctly evaluated the role of theory in the process of organizing and making the revolution. He studied the Marxist materials that he had at hand, the manifesto of the Communist Party, the works of Plekhanov, and soon he began to familiarize himself with Lenin, by his writings and directives, his valor as organizer and head of the Communists, until he saw him in person at party events. From that time on they had a great friendship affirmed in militancy and the great commonality of opinions and concerns. Stalin was also a great reader of Russian literature. He was a man of vast culture, which grew daily throughout his life. How can one not keep in mind in the training of communists in all countries his most outstanding works, Anarchism or Socialism, Marxism and the National Question, On the Problem of Nationalities, the October Revolution and the Tactics of the Russian Communists, the Foundations of Leninism, Concerning Questions of Leninism, Trotskyism or Leninism, Dialectical and Historical Materialism, Marxism, and Linguistics, Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, the reports to the Congresses of the Communist Party. Stalin was a theoretician of the revolution, a Marxist who recreated and developed revolutionary theory in order to provide answers to the problems put forward by the revolution. He was not a theoretician who speculated with knowledge to try to generate ideas and proposals. No, his theoretical work addressed burning issues that had to do with the development of the class struggle, with the problems that the party, the trade unions, the state and the revolution were facing on an international scale. The depth of his writings is not at odds with the simple form of making them understood. Stalin is rigorous in his theoretical analysis, his positions are valid, they provide a real guide to action, as he himself pointed out referring to Marxism, but also they are simple and easy to understand. Stalin's detractors insist on some issues that we should analyze. All of them, the confessed reactionaries of anti-communism, the Trotskyists, the revisionists and opportunists of all shades agree principally on the following charges: intellectual mediocrity, Lenin's testament that supposedly condemned him, the building of socialism in a single country, forced collectivization, the bureaucratization of the party and state, the liquidation of the Bolshevik Old Guard, the Great Purges, his tyrannical and bloodthirsty character, forced industrialization, his incompetence in the war, the cult of personality. With regard to Stalin's intellectual mediocrity, the facts, history and its vicissitudes speak emphatically. The October Revolution, the building of socialism in a large country and for the first time in the history of mankind, his skill in leading the party, the working class and the peoples of the USSR in the great feat of building a new world would not have been possible with a mediocre leader who was poor intellectually. These diatribes fall under their own weight. Trotsky, who claimed to be a great theoretician and man of culture and was one of his detractors in this area, was defeated precisely, in theory and practice, by one who, according to him, was a mediocrity. In regard to the so-called Lenin Testament, a lot of nonsense has been written, such as that Trotsky was the one anointed by Lenin to replace him as head of the party, as if those notes of Lenin had been hidden by the Central Committee. We say that Lenin's health was very shaky in those days in which he is supposed to have written the famous testament. His sensitivity was weakened by the complaints of his companion. However, Lenin had the revolutionary culture, the Bolshevik training to understand that he could not have written a testament, a last will. He also knew that one leader, whatever his rank, can only give his opinions, not orders, in the collective. For these reasons one must understand these notes of Lenin as opinions. Moreover, they were out of the context of the everyday life of the leadership of the party and state and in no way were they orders to be complied with without question. On the other hand, it is completely false that these notes were hidden from the Central Committee. The latter knew about and discussed them. The results were known. Stalin was chosen the main leader of the Bolshevik party and it was a correct and wise decision. History has shown these facts irrefutably. The one supposedly anointed by Lenin as leader of the party, Trotsky, was placed by life and the revolutionary struggle in the dustbin of the counter-revolution. The Leninist thesis of the building of socialism in one country takes into account the uneven development of capitalism and as a consequence the various stages of the class struggle. That situation made it possible to break the chain of imperialism at its weakest link, old Russia. Stalin was the one who continued this line, relying on the workers and peasants, on the great spiritual and materials reserves of the Soviet peoples. He carried out the great feat, defended the revolution and defeated the detractors of this thesis. Those who raised the impossibility of building socialism in the Soviet Union as long as the revolution did not succeed in the capitalist countries of Europe and labeled the peasants as reactionaries and counter-revolutionaries were proven to be wrong. The USSR developed, and so far there has been no revolution in any of the capitalist countries in Europe. On the forced collectivization of the countryside, Stalin's detractors claim that he violated the will of the peasants, destroyed the agrarian economy and eliminated the social base of the revolution made up by the medium and rich peasants, the kulaks. The facts are diametrically opposite. The necessary carrying out of the NEP in the countryside developed the rural bourgeoisie in a natural way and stripped millions of poor farmers of the land, depriving the population of cereals. Basing itself on Marxism-Leninism and taking social reality into account, the party proposed to bring socialism to the countryside. Relying on the millions of poor peasants, it pushed forward a great social and political movement for the formation of cooperatives, the kolkhozes. This meant the expropriation of the kulaks, in some cases people's tribunals, and drastic sanctions. International reaction spoke of repression and massacres. In reality, there was a socialist revolution in the countryside, the work of millions of poor peasants who assumed their role as the protagonists in the life of the country of the Soviets. And, as we know, a revolution unleashes the initiative and achievements of the masses, but also the anger of its enemies. As a result, agriculture and livestock flourished. The Soviet Union became the largest producer of wheat. The mechanization and the modernization of agriculture reached unprecedented levels, at the forefront on the international scale. Stalin is continually blamed for the bureaucratization that was in reality growing in the party and state. Stalin was never in his life a bureaucrat. Quite the contrary, his dynamism was always expressed in direct contact with the base of the party and with the masses. He was one of the leaders of the Soviets before the revolution. His whole life was in action. Bureaucracy is a social phenomenon, a degeneration that arises in the bourgeois administration. Remember that a good part of the Bolshevik administration had to resort to old Tsarist functionaries, that penetrated into the revolutionary ranks, into the party and state. Bureaucracy was really present in the life of the socialist state. It affected many activists and leaders. In some cases the responsibilities of power were transformed into small or large privileges that were creating a caste of bureaucrats who undermined the functioning of the party and the state administration, which separated the party from the masses. Stalin did not promote the bureaucracy, but in reality he did not have either the ability or the experience to eliminate it. Several offenses of an ideological character aimed at eliminating it took place, precisely under Stalin's initiative. The political education, ideological struggle, the validity of democracy in the party. The party elections were expressions of the struggle of the communists against bureaucracy. They cannot be dismissed having been useless. They achieved results. Among other things, they allowed for the continuation of the social and material achievements of the dictatorship of the proletariat, the ideological, political and organizational cleansing of the party and state, the isolation and expulsion of several groups of opportunists and traitors. However, in fact, they were not able to eradicate the bureaucracy and opportunism. Various opportunists and traitors evaded the ideological struggle and hid. They would return later, after the death of Stalin. It is clear that bureaucracy is an ideological illness which is persistently reborn and which must be fought relentlessly to the end. Stalin did not promote bureaucracy. Rather, he was one of its victims. The accusation made against Stalin that he was a bloody dictator and despotant refers to the ideological cleansing, to the revolutionary repression of the counter-revolutionary outbreaks in the city and countryside, to the alleged liquidation of the Bolshevik Old Guard. It is necessary to understand that the dictatorship of the proletariat is not a wedding party in which everything is rosy. No, quite the contrary. A whole armed, economic campaign, a trade boycott, an ideological and political penetration by imperialism and the international bourgeoisie was orchestrated against the dictatorship of the proletariat. In opposition to the new power of the workers, from within society, the old ruling classes, overthrown by the revolution but not physically eliminated, repeatedly carried out acts of sabotage. They tried many times to organize rebellions and uprisings, using mercenaries and men and women of the people who were deceived. They based themselves on religion and the priests, on feudal traditions, on liberal elements in the administration, and on some occasions they infiltrated their agents into the party and the Soviet state. Within the party itself, in the new state and in the Red Army, there appeared over and over again degenerate elements who made attacks on the dictatorship of the proletariat in theory and practice, who tried to divert the party, to assume its leadership, to organize coups d'état. Some of these elements had been, in the past, outstanding members and leaders of the party in the revolution, and they tried, therefore, to take advantage of their positions to change the course of socialism. The fight to preserve and defend the line of the party, its ideological, political and organizational unity was bitter and persistent, because again and again, the counter-revolution grew stronger in its attacks and, during Stalin's life, it was again and again defeated by the force of reason, by the firmness of the Bolsheviks, by the support of the base of the party and the army, by the support of the masses of workers and peasants. In reality, the Bolshevik Old Guard, those comrades who dreamed of and organized the Great October Revolution, were falling behind. Some fell in combat for the revolution, others were assassinated by the counter-revolution. Others paid the physical tribute of their lives. Some survived Stalin. The old Bolsheviks, the veteran communists, knew how to face their responsibilities. They learned how to solve problems and unknown issues as they arose. They were put at the head of the great feat of building socialism, and were called old Bolsheviks not because they were old, but because of their qualities, for their militant and permanent adherence to the principles of Marxism-Leninism, for their quality as communist cadres and fighters. The fight against the opportunist factions within the party and state were real battles that mobilized the party, all its members. They were a demonstration of the proletarian firmness of Stalin and his comrades in arms. They constituted one victory after another, that guaranteed the life of the Soviet state, the building of socialism and the continuation of the revolution. Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev and Bukharin were the main chieftains of the counter-revolution, who were confronted and defeated, in theory and practice, with the material and political achievements by the political correctness of the party leadership, headed by Stalin. The dark legend of the work camps, of the confinement, of psychiatric hospitals, of prisons overcrowded with workers and communists, of the mass executions and mass graves are nothing more than the infamous slander of the reactionaries and imperialism, of the Nazis and social democracy, of the Trotskyists and revisionists, of the opportunists. They cannot be proved by any records, much less by the existence of concentration camps and mass graves. They fall under their own weight. Much has been said about Stalin's incompetence in leading the war. Nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, Stalin was not a soldier by training. He did not study in any academy, nor could he claim mastery of the military arts, a thorough knowledge of weapons and military strategy and tactics. But it is clear that he was a proletarian revolutionary soldier who learned this art in the very course of the revolutionary civil war in the first years of Soviet power, that he was steeled as such in the difficult years of the building of socialism, and that he played an outstanding role in the leadership of the Great Patriotic War, in the resistance against the Nazi invading hordes, and in the great political and military offensive that drove the Red Army to take Berlin. No one has claimed that Stalin was a great military leader. All the revolutionaries recognize him as the leader of the Soviet proletariat and the peoples, as the political leader of the international proletariat, as a proletarian revolutionary, as a communist. The accusations that Stalin promoted and used the whole gamut of praise and exaggerations that have been called the cult of personality for his prestige continue to be a part of the anti-communist arsenal. In fact, Stalin daily received praise and recognition from his comrades and friends, from the workers and peasants who expressed them from their heart to express gratitude and recognition. There was also the praise of the opportunists who sought favors from him. The former demonstrations were sincere, a product of the generous spirit of the workers and people. The latter had a dual intention, based on facts. They tried to elevate Stalin above others, above the events and in this way to personally take advantage of this situation. The cult of personality was in fact a defect of the first experience in the building of socialism. It began with good intentions, but finally it degenerated. It hurt Soviet power and Stalin himself. This is an incontestable fact. But to argue from there that Stalin himself encouraged these campaigns, that he became an egomaniac, a narcissist, is a big lie. Many pages and books can be written about Stalin. In fact, there are thousands of publications about his life and work. There are those of his comrades and friends, but also those of his enemies and detractors. In fact, the life of Stalin is the life of the first proletarian revolution itself. Stalin did not make the revolution to his measure. The revolution projected Stalin as one of its best sons and leaders. Ecuador, 2012. Unity and Struggle number 24.